Trees are falling, hearts are breaking. How we need to hear from God. You've been promised, we've been waiting. Welcome, Holy Child. Welcome, Holy Child. Hope that you don't mind our manger. How I wish we would have known, but long awaited, holy stranger, make yourself at home. Please make yourself at home. Bring your peace into our violence. Oh, the hungry souls be filled. Word now breaking heaven's silence. Welcome to our world. Welcome to our world. Fragile fingers sent to heal us. Tender brow prepared for thorn. Tiny heart whose blood will save us. Unto us is born. Unto us is born. So wrap our injured flesh around you. Breathe our air and walk our side. Rob our sins and make us holy. Perfect Son of God. Perfect Son of God. Welcome to our
their minds and they started packing. They left before the sun came up that day. An exit to eternal summer slacking. But where were they going without ever knowing the way?
Things to say.
And when the car broke down, they started walking. But where were they going without ever knowing the way?
Anyone can see the road that they're all someone paved in gold.
It's always summer, they never get cold. They never get hungry, they never get old and gray.
Can see the shadows wandering off somewhere. Won't make it home, but they really don't care.
They wanted the highway, they're happier there today. Today, the children woke up and they couldn't find them. They left before the sun came up that day.
They just drove off and left it all behind them.
Where were they going without ever knowing the way?
Anyone can see the road that they're walking was
summer, they never get cold, they never get hungry, they never get old and gray.
You can see their shadows wandering off somewhere. They won't make it home, but they really don't care.
They wanted the highway, they're happier there today, today.
Anyone can see the road that they walked on was paved in gold.
It's always summer, they never get cold, they never get lonely, they never get old and gray.
You can see their shadows wandering off somewhere. They won't make it home, but they really don't care.
They wanted the highway, they're happier there today, today.
Have you ever been on a journey when you pretty much knew where you were going, but you didn't quite know how you would get there, but you just set out anyway? I'll bet you have, because I've just described the life of the Spirit. And today we have a story about a journey that unfolds just in that way, that may have lessons for us. So let's take a moment. You're not here by accident. Something you see or hear today is meant for you. So let's be still, open our hearts, and prepare for that special message from God to hit you whenever it might. Amen.
Be still and know the Lord is God. Be still and know the Lord is holy. Be still, O restless soul of mine. Listen to the message of words of God's unfailing love.
The first reading for today is from the book of Ephesians. God gave grace to me, the least of all God's people, to preach the good news about the immeasurable riches of Christ to the Gentiles. God sent me to reveal the secret plan that had been hidden since the beginning of time by God, who created everything. God's purpose is now to show the rulers and powers in the heavens the many different varieties of wisdom through the church. This was consistent with the plan God had from the beginning of time that was accomplished through Christ Jesus our Lord. In Christ, we have bold and confident access to God through faith.
Be still and know the Lord is God. Be still and know the Lord is holy. Be still, O restless soul of mine. Listen to the message of words of God's unfailing love.
The second reading for today is from the Gospel of Matthew. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judea, during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where the Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people, Israel. Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me, so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went and looked. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route.
Be still and know the Lord is God. Be still and know the Lord is holy. Be still, a restless soul of mine. Listen to the message of words of God's unfailing love. Be still, be still.
So a funny thing happened to me one day this week. I was reading a book about emotional conditions and brainwave patterns and kind of what happens whenever we feel certain things. And I was reading the chapter about getting flustered. Most of you probably have had the experience of getting flustered. That's when you're going about your normal daily activity and something unexpected happens, and it might be a little challenging or a little threatening, and for a few seconds you lose your place and you don't really know how to react, and normally the threat subsides and it gets over really quickly, and then you kind of go back to your usual equilibrium state. But what this chapter said is, for a few minutes after that, after it feels like things are back to normal, your brain is still not back to normal. And you're prone to doing things you wouldn't normally do that might cause you a little bit of trouble. So I read this chapter, set it down, get up, leave my condo. I have to go to the post office. I have to buy a couple stamps and mail some cards. I pull into the parking lot of the post office. And as soon as I pull in, right in front of me is this huge post office truck, bigger than any moving van I've ever seen, and he wants to get out, okay? And so I see that, and then I see there are cars on either side, the right and the left, and they're parked, and they're trying to get to the middle so they can get out too. So I think, oh my goodness, I should back out the way I came in. But I looked in my rearview mirror, a car had already come in behind me, so there's no way to go that way. And I don't know if people were honking their horns and flashing their lights and yelling and screaming, but I wouldn't bet they weren't. I don't quite remember. There was a guy in the middle of the parking lot trying to wave directions, but I couldn't figure out what he was doing. So I saw a parking spot up and to the left. And there was no time to think carefully or prudently or wisely about whether it was smart to go in the parking lot. I just stepped on the gas and went. Luckily, I didn't hit anybody. Nobody hit me. As soon as I got in the parking spot, that cleared up the middle of the cluster, so other cars had an easier decision. Everyone got where they needed to go. There was no trouble at all. Got out of the car, relieved, went into the post office, bought the stamps, mailed the cards, went outside the post office, reached for my keys, Didn't have my keys. Checked every pocket. Checked every pocket again. Went back to the counter. No keys. Went back outside. Went to my car. There, the keys, safe and sound. In the ignition. With the car running. Every door carefully locked. And just 1 hour and $110 later, I was on my way. You know, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been flustered. I've been driving a long time. I know you take your keys with you when you leave a car. I've learned at least that much. And you know, that happened to me when I was flustered, but I can imagine a person experiencing the same thing, getting maybe flustered in the same way, but not forgetting themselves to the point of losing their keys. I can imagine a person going in maybe with a stronger base level of serenity so that those distractions wouldn't have had as much impact. So when I thought about kind of images or pictures of serenity, of peace, deep peacefulness, one idea came from our reading today, the very end of the story of the Magi, who search for and find the Christ child and worship him and offer their gifts. Doesn't that look like a peaceful, serene scene? They're not going to forget their keys on the way home. Trust me. You know. This is our story today. It's the 12th day of Christmas, Epiphany, and it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's really my favorite Christmas story. And I've preached on it maybe 15 times. And every time I preach on it, I see something new in the story, or it might be better to say I unsee something new. This is one of those stories so beloved by traditions of the church that different people over generations have added layers and layers and layers of tradition on top of it. And a whole lot we think we know about that story isn't really in the text. It came later. Like the idea that there were 3 of them. That's not what the story says. It says there were 3 gifts. So that's why people assume there were 3 people. But I have a hard time imagining 3 people only making such a long, difficult journey. So I imagine more a scene that looked like this, with dozens, maybe hundreds of people, men and women and children. And like this image in particular, because if you look carefully at the back, you see some kids on bicycles. So I kind of think it was like that. It was like a big, huge community traveling. Another tradition that's come down to us, you have the 3 individuals. Tradition has given them names and has decided they represent different racial and ethnic and language groups. And that's a part of the tradition that isn't in the story, but I say let's keep that. I'd like to keep that, I like to imagine it was a very diverse cultural group in different languages and different religious traditions and all of that, traveling together, a group that in some sense might represent the whole world. And then the other part of the tradition, we tend to call them kings, right? We 3 kings of Orientar. That comes from the Christmas Carol, 1,500 years later. They weren't kings. They were actually magi, is the better word. Magi are wise people, are spiritual seekers, people who study and practice and engage in prayer and meditation and so that they'll be prepared. They're people who believe that they will have a God moment in their life and they want to be prepared to recognize it. So they do study. They study their traditions, their texts, maybe other people's traditions and texts. They study the heavens and the stars because they believe that a special star will come and lead them to the place of God's peace and serenity. They do all this studying, but they don't keep their heads in the books all the time. They also observe the world around them, because there's as much to learn from the world as there is from books. And they don't want to miss that star they've studied so much, because their head is in a library and not out looking in the world that God created. So they studied so they would recognize the star. They saw the star when it came. And then the third step, they left home. They didn't just assume, oh, the star's up there, it'll come to my doorstep as if I just sit here and wait. They knew they had to leave. They had to leave some things behind. They had to change. They had to take a journey that they didn't really understand how it would go. They just kind of knew what the end would be. And so they took this journey, and here's the part of the story that I unsaw this year for the very first time. Every time I preach this story, I've assumed they saw the star, they packed up their bags, they went out in the desert, the star went ahead of them, they just kind of followed the star. It was pretty easy because, the star just showed them which way to go. When the star moved left, they went left. The star went right, they went right. Do you know it never says in the story that they followed the star? It doesn't say that. It says they saw the star, and then at the end of the journey, the star reappeared. Wouldn't it be strange if that whole journey they didn't have the star to guide them? They saw the star, then pretty quickly it disappeared. And they're out in the desert, and they don't have a star. They have a memory of a star. They have a general direction that was leading that way. And so we're going to keep going that way and hope it comes back. It's pretty impressive they were willing to do that. Especially when you consider that journey took 2 years. It's another misconception. We have these nice nativity scenes where the angels and the shepherds and the magi are all there together. No, the magi showed up late. 2 years late. Shepherds were long gone. Angels were long gone. Mary and Joseph like, what? They were 2 years late. I don't know, maybe because they stopped to go shopping. Maybe part of why they were late is if they were a really ethnically and economically very diverse group with language barriers, sometimes it takes longer to move if you need to take the time to work those things out. Some communities as a value say, we're going to do this together. Even if it takes a slower time, we're going to stick together and learn to communicate on the way, whatever it takes. Maybe it was that. Or maybe it was just they didn't have the light. And so the next important thing that happened, they were heading in the right direction. They got to Jerusalem. When they got there, they stopped and asked directions. Okay? Something a lot of us would benefit from doing more than we do. Because you know how it is. You get close and you say, oh, I can find it. I don't need any help. Sometimes it's when you get close that you need the most help, right? And there are people who can and will help. And so they stopped and they asked directions. They asked directions from King Herod. I might have rethought that choice. But, because he had bad intentions. But he did have the information. Or at least his magi, his counselors, his priests had the information. They asked, where is the King of the Jews to be born? And he said, well, let me ask my people. They said, oh, that's easy. We've known that all along. The King of the Jews will be born in Bethlehem. It's just down the road. And that's when the star reappeared. And the Magi followed the star and found the Christ child. here's a question. Why didn't anyone go with him? All these priests, all these scribes, all these people, they knew where the Christ child was going to be born all along. They probably saw the star 2 years ago. They certainly saw the star now. It's not that far. It's a local call. Why didn't they go? Maybe they were too settled, too busy, too preoccupied. They had houses, they had jobs, they had families, they had all these things. Maybe it was just too far to go. And they figured, we can go anytime. Not the Magi. They'd been traveling for 2 years. They weren't going to miss this opportunity. They'd left a whole lot behind and carried a lot of value with them. They went to the house of Mary. They found the Christ child. And the final step in their process, they began to give. They gave worship, which is a way of giving love and devotion and loyalty and honor. And all those treasures they brought with them, they gave them as well, the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. That completed the cycle where they found that serenity, that peace of God that they'd searched for 2 long years. And they left us a model as a community not unlike them to prepare by studying and praying and meditating so we'll recognize that God moment when we see it, to observe the world around us so we don't miss it, to go, leave home, go somewhere new, go out into the desert, and follow as best we can, because the way may not be exactly clear. And it's important to stay together as we go. When we get close, to get out and ask directions. And then when we find that God peace, to give what we have, so there's space in our hearts to be filled with that peace to take home. I heard a story about a woman who desperately wanted the peace of God in her life. And she would pray about it sometimes. And one night as she was driving home from work, she heard the voice of God. And the voice of God said, I understand you want the peace of God in your heart. She said, yes, I want that desperately. I would give anything to have that. And I said, well, just so happens we've got the peace of God on sale. How much money do you have in your pocket right now? She looked, it was $20. Said, this is your lucky day. The peace of God costs $20. She said, well, that's great, but do you really need the whole $20? Because I'm almost out of gas. I need to get some gas before I won't make it home unless I stop and get gas. God said, oh, you need gas. That means you have a car, which means the price of the peace of God is $20 in your car. She said, but if I don't have my car, how will I get to work in the morning? I said, oh, you have to get to work. That means you have a job. So the price of the peace of God is $20 and your car and your job. She said, but if I lose my job, how will I pay the mortgage? God said, well, you might have expected to hear this coming, but if you have a mortgage, that means you have a house. That means the price of the peace of God is now $20 and your car and your job and your house. She said, but if I lose my house, where will my kids and I live? And God said, you are not paying attention, because now the price of the peace of God is $20 and your car and your house and your job and your kids. Finally, she stopped talking. And God said, so do we have a deal? The woman said, yes. Yes, we do. I need the peace of God so much, I'm willing to give all of that for it. God said, good. that I'm just about to give you the peace of God, but first, and I want to ask you to do me a favor. You see this $20? It's not your $20, it's my $20. We've settled that. But I want to give it to you and ask you to use it kind of as my emissary. Use it in a way that you think that I would want it used. And the same goes for your car. And the same goes for your house. And the same goes for your job. And the same goes for your kids. All things come from me. But I want you to use them in the way that you think I would want them used. I want you to care for them in the way that you think I would want them cared for. Can you do that for me? Now I have the peace of God